Okay, I'm here, I'm back, I am ready to answer all of your burning questions about writing. On this piece of paper, I have many questions that have been asked to me on TikTok, and so I think I'm just gonna get right into it. Also, I'm holding this microphone very carefully because I'm still figuring out my setup, my stand. I can't get it close enough. It's a whole thing. Like I said before, bear with me. I will eventually figure out this YouTube thing. First question is, why does animation writing take longer, and why isn't it covered by the WGA? First part of that question, it just takes longer because animated films take years and years to be animated. During that time, you have someone who's going to rewrite the story over and over because there's time. And so henceforth, what you just end up with is a story that keeps getting reworked over and over, usually for the better. Why isn't animation covered by the WGA? Honestly, it's very complicated. I don't even fully understand it. Now, I do have an animated film that I worked on that's coming out in February of 2026, 2 weeks before my wedding. Shameless plug, go see Goat. But at some point before that movie comes out, I would assume that I'm going to be privy to that process of like, will this movie be covered? How does it all work? So I will get back to you on that. Next question, recommendations for Bob Dylan documentaries. I think my favorite one is the classic one, Don't Look Back, from 1965. Don't quote me on that. I just love the cinema verite style documentaries where we're just following someone around. I like that style way more than the talking head business. And so that film, we just get to hang out with young Bob Dylan in his prime. It's so good. So much of the iconic images and scenes of his career are from that film. What did you get out of your MFA? I'm trying to decide if it's worth it. So I will be perfectly honest. I do not think the MFA is worth it for everyone. For me, in my specific circumstance, I feel like I got a lot out of it. I am someone who didn't have like a group of friends that I could get together with and make movies. I wasn't a theater kid. I wasn't a YouTube kid. I learned so much in film school about the production elements. Maybe not as much about writing. A lot of that stuff comes from just writing yourself, but like in terms of production, I kind of had a secondary editing track, so I edited in film school a lot. Actually edited, it's a long story for another video, but I edited an entire feature film by myself, and I was the first student to ever do it for that program. Usually it's like a person who's already graduated, they're getting paid. I didn't get paid anyway. For some people, it's very worth it. You have to ask yourself that question. What are you looking for? It's a lot of money. It's debt. It is not necessary by any means. I've said that many times on TikTok. You do not need to go to film school to be successful. But for some people, it can be helpful. Next question. Could the Scary Movie reboot bring comedy back? Absolutely. Next question. No, but seriously, I do think that, there has been a lot of talk about how hard it is in comedy right now. I think that during the pandemic, we became accustomed to comedy going to streamers. We became accustomed to a lot of things going to streamers, but it's no secret that we are not getting as many banger comedy films in theaters compared to like the 90s, the 2000s. I think it could come back. Comedy is a communal experience. It'll come back. It's going to happen. Can I write something based on existing IP, or would I get in legal trouble? You would not get in legal trouble just for writing that thing. However, I would ask you the question, do you think you can possibly get paid to write that? Because you wouldn't. And I know a lot of young writers get excited and they're like, I'm going to write my idea for a sequel to a film that already exists, and then I'm going to sell it to the studio. It never really works like that. Usually people are pitching for that job, and then the person is hired based off the idea they pitched. Then they get paid to write the script. If you want to write something for fun and just keep it to yourself, or even put it online, that's basically fan fiction. You can do that, but that is not how you actually get those jobs. Just FYI. With all the things studios do to mess up movies, how are Christopher Nolan's always so good? In short, it's because he has control. And look, I know on TikTok I have talked a lot about how I feel like the studio interference is responsible for a lot of things that people complain about in movies, and I do believe that. But I'll also admit that there are situations where directors get complete control, and then sometimes what you end up with isn't good. That's just the way art works. That's normal. Have you read Film Crit Hulk's story about Tarantino saying you should never ever hate a movie? I hadn't read it. When I was looking at these questions, I did read it, and it was really good. I basically have the same philosophy. Movies are really hard to make. Any movie you watch, no matter how good or bad you think it is, you can learn something from that movie. But his rant is a little more existential. It's like, why waste the energy to talk about stuff that you hate? And again, I agree. I'm not a hater. Can you give us a tattoo tour? Not right now. At some point, I will. You said most scripts don't get made. Why? That's a really good question. So basically, there's something called development. At any given point, a studio has a bunch of scripts that they've bought, a bunch of ideas that they've had that they've paid writers to write, and then sometimes you have a good idea, but the script doesn't end up being as good. Or sometimes it's like, maybe it's like of the moment that idea seems really good, but then culturally it's like we can't make that movie anymore. But it's really just a numbers game, right? Like if you're going to buy 100 scripts, that's just a random example. Then after all those scripts are written, I mean, which takes time, it can take months to years after you're doing all the rewrites and stuff. Then you might be like, okay, 5 of these movies are worth greenlighting. Now, which can we attach a star to, et cetera, et cetera. So if most scripts don't get made, that means most of the work that screenwriters do results in movies that don't come out, which is why I'm always saying, like, most of the time you have screenwriters who work for 10 years before something actually comes out. How do you get representation? That's like it's very, very hard to answer. I'm going to have to make a video just on that. I'll do it at some point. Once a screenwriter sells a script, is it true you're no longer involved in the project? Not necessarily. It also depends on your deal. Sometimes you'll get like a guaranteed rewrite, which means you turn in a script and then they have to pay you again. They'll give you notes, you'll do a rewrite. But in general, yeah, the studio owns that material. They are not obligated, even if it's an original idea. There are all these stories of people who sell original scripts. Usually you end up with like a story by credit, which means the story came from your brain, but the studio doesn't really, they don't have to be nice to writers, and usually they're not. Can you explain what a spec script is? Yeah, basically it just means you're writing a script on spec. It means you're not being paid for it. It means you're going into a room, writing the movie that you'd want to see, then taking it out to studios, trying to get them to buy it. The opposite of that would be like when I worked on Magic School Bus or a piece of IP. They say, we own this thing. We want you to come in and write it. It's a job. Other than just telling the story, can you tell us what is most important when pitching? Another huge question. I'll probably do a video just about pitching because pitching is... What are you doing? My cat's being crazy. Pitching is really, really, really hard, and it is an art. It's selling a movie, it's acting, it's performance, it's so many things other than just the story, as the question said. When you're meeting with a producer and just not connecting with the ideas they're pitching, what do you do? You know, when I was a younger writer, I thought that I would offend people, and if I said like, I'm not really into that idea, that they'd be really mad, and so I would just always kind of pretend to be interested. But in the same way that producers have no problem saying, no, that idea is not for me, writers can say, no, that idea is not for me, I'm not the right person for that, totally normal, no one's going to be mad. Any tips on how to test the waters to see if your script is actually good enough to query? Query meaning sending it out to managers, potentially to have them sign you. Really, the only way to know that is to have people that you trust tell you it's good. That's really the only barometer. And not like your parents or your yes man reader. It has to be someone who is going to be critical about your story. How do I know when to trust the quality of my own work beyond my own feelings? I feel that. And I don't know. How do you approach a second draft? Do you open up a new blank document and move stuff over? I appreciate your content. Thank you. I appreciate your question. So a long time ago, I heard John August on Script Notes talk about his process for rewriting. And for a second version, for a rewrite, he basically opens a blank document. And then he was saying that basically all the important stuff will make its way into that draft. For me personally, I would never ever do that. That feels like starting over to me. It feels like throwing away good work. I just approach it like an edit, like a revision. I take all the notes that I've gotten from the people I trust, from my reps, and there will be giant chunks that I'm deleting, starting over. I might hop into a new document to write like a new sequence or try something completely out of the box. But personally, I don't believe in just starting over from scratch. Never, ever would I do that. And then I think this is the last question I'm going to answer for now. Hey, Nick, when you write a spec script, how do you go about writing a first outline? Do you apply structure first or write the story and then apply the desired structure? What software do you use? Software, that's easy. Final Draft, it can be really buggy. It's annoying. Script Notes, they have like a long withstanding feud about Final Draft. I tried another software called Faden for a while, but it's just hard because when you write movies for studios, everybody uses Final Draft. So eventually someone's going to ask you for the Final Draft document, then you have to convert it and it might get all wonky. I just use Final Draft. I've also used Writer Duet when I'm co-writing with people. That's kind of like the Google Docs of screenwriting, and I think it's free. Don't quote me on that. But no, in terms of structure, I like to have the big plot points. So, like the 5 biggest plot points of the movie, everything else in between, I kind of figure out during the draft. I think in general, a rule of thumb is don't worry about structure on your first draft because you're going to get caught up in it. You might be limiting yourself. Like if you need to write a 45-page Act 1 to figure out what the 25-page version is, do that. It doesn't matter in a first draft. Structure will come to you, and I think it's more so something for editing and revision. Okay, well, those are basically my first batch of questions. If you have questions, leave them in the comments or on TikTok, and I will try to get to them. Thank you again for watching. I'm going to be experimenting with more YouTube videos, all kinds of content, so more to come.